Hi, my name's Ed Nolan and I am an A-level psychology teacher. In today's video we're going to use a nature-nurture debate to evaluate different approaches in psychology. Now, here's a picture of Simone Biles, who is an absolute phenomenal athlete. She's an American gymnast and she has won more senior titles than any other gymnast in history. She has 30 Olympic and championship medals and is absolutely top of her game. She is an incredible gymnast. But the question is, well, how? What caused this? How does someone get that good? Is it because she was born that way? Did she come in? Does she have a unique physiological set that helps her to become that athlete? Or is it because of her environment? That she has been nurtured and she is the product of good parents and coaches and that supportive environment? Well, this is a question we ask in psychology, and it's part of what's called the nature-nurture debate. It's this idea that environment and biology plays a part. Well, let's look at what Simone has said. She was there saying, I was missing out of public school and going to the football games, prom and homecoming, but I've been to 3 world championships, so I think it's like a win-win. Well, okay, she's missed all of that other points because she has been training as a gymnast and she has had a unique family and coaching setup and teachers and all of those people and friends who've supported her in that have got her to that. But she also said, I was built this way for a reason, so I'm going to use it. Meaning, her biology, she had the physiology to do that. Well, let's have a look at this nature-nurture debate. We think really on reality as it being a kind of scale, and that people are more on one side of the scale to the others rather than polars, one or the other. It's not nature or nurture. It's part of that scale. But we do have some approaches that really sit on the far ends of that scale. So, for instance, the nature argument is that we are born a certain way because of our genetics and our biology, okay? And so really we are born to be athletes or whatever. I have family members who suffer from dyslexia. They are born with that. That's something that is born as part of their makeup, as part of the way that they function in the world. So the biological approach most definitely takes that, particularly with this genetic idea that we inherit ways to behave, ways that we function. But then there's the nurture viewpoint, this idea that actually our experience plays a part. So I don't know if you remember, if my button will press here, the behaviourist approach, this idea of tabula rasa, being born a blank slate into the world. Okay, and that actually everything that is part of us has been added on to us. So for instance, I'm not a very good singer. And so that is because my particular slate hasn't been prepared, hasn't been used because of my family environment and other factors for me to develop to be a good singer. However, I think I'm really good at telling dad jokes, such as speeding on a multi-storey car park. That's wrong on many levels. You know, that's a real talent, is it? That I've nurtured that, and that's part of being my environment. Maybe you agree with me or not. So this idea that behaviourism and conditioning is very much on the nurture side, but also positive psychology, because positive psychology, they reject this idea of biology playing a part, that you are a prisoner of your genes. And so there's this idea that actually your environment nurtures who you are. So the positive psychology can be seen as a nurture approach. However, we have what's called interactionists, those who lie in the middle. And these are psychodynamic and cognitive. Well, why psychodynamic? Because psychodynamic believe we are born with certain drives, like our id, it drives us. But our environment, such as the psychosexual stages, you know, how were you potty trained? That kind of stuff will lead to your end kind of personality and behaviour. So both your biology, the drives, and then your experience, psychosexual stages, lead to who you are. Whereas cognitive, they also will look at that. So they kind of look at the idea of your brain being the hardware. If you think of the computer analogy, your brain is the hardware and your mind is like the software that works within the hardware. The software is constrained or is developed according to what you've got in your hardware. So it's an interactionist viewpoint. Okay, so we're evaluating here, meaning we've got to make some judgments as to the worth of something. So what is good about saying I'm nature or I'm nurture, and what is a problem with being that way? Well, the first good thing is an application. Okay, so for instance, if you're taking the nature viewpoint, this genetic idea, well, that can be applied. You know, we have genetic counselling that can work with that, or we can take medications. And increasingly in psychology, they are looking at genes as a way of tapping into understanding behaviour and changing behaviour. Or if you take the nurture viewpoint, we've got conditioning, operant conditioning with children. Look at it, nice, if we look down there, a nice little kind of star chart of the naughty seat. That can change behaviour. We can use it. And you can't do that if you say, well, I'm a bit of nature, I'm a bit of nurture. No, you can make clear applications. So that actually is a good thing. However, what is the problem? Well, being on one end of the spectrum, if you're behavioural or behavioural or biological, it's too simplistic to say it is one thing or another. For instance, let's take the idea of post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder occurs when you have a stressful event. Usually we associate that with military situations or war, but it can be other situations that we could go through, such as your son telling you he supports Liverpool. Anyway, that's Liverpool Football Club. So what we have is post-traumatic, but what we know is that we take the same people, put them in the same stressful situation. Some suffer, some do not. Some suffer severely, some do not suffer severely. Well, why the difference? Now we know probably because it's to do with their personality. It's to do with the kind of person that they are, which is genetic. Our personality is kind of inherit that, it's genetic. So that is actually part of the nature view. However, we also know that if you give someone resilience training, that actually then put them in this traumatic situation, they are less likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or it's going to be less severe. So that's obviously to do with the nurture part of it, their experience part. So we can see that actually in this, that your biology and your experience will both interact and play a part on how much you suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. But this can be seen in all behaviours. So it seems that by looking at one or the other, it's too simplistic, and that human behaviour is much more complex than that. Okay, so our behaviour reflects a combination of both genetics and environmental conditions. We have to look at that. Any other way of looking at it is too blinkered, too simplistic. So let's go back to Simone Biles here. Why is she good at what she is? Yes, she does have the skills. They're intrinsic, they're innate, they're part of her genetics. She has the build, she has the balance, she has the concentration, she has the personality that has the drive. But that was not enough. That also the training regimes, the supportive family, the conditioning, the congratulations, all of those things had to be in place for her to be that good. She needed both the nature and the nurture. Right, so what we learned today is that the biological approach takes a nature view, that the behaviouralist approach takes a nurture view, positive ignores nature, and so therefore is a nurture view, that cognitive takes both and is an interactionist idea that both interact with each other, and psychodynamic, and that by strictly taking nature nurture can be good in the sense that it can apply a application. However, it's too blinkered, too simplistic to look at it, and that we must look at really the most positive way, the most helpful way of looking at behaviour is interactionist. So what we can see here is there is a real situation for biological and behavioural as a negative point, whereas cognitive, psychodynamic, it seems to be a strength. I hope that's been helpful to you, and you've learnt a little bit about nature nurture and how it can apply to evaluating approaches, not to mention one of my best jokes.